In this mini projects episode, we'll overcomplicate a simple task and break some things in the process. We're going to be doing a little bit of work on this Dewalt drill. I've had this drill for somewhere around 5 years and used it for a lot of things, many of which it wasn't really designed for. It's pretty much always been able to power through anything I've put it up against, but everything has its limits. And somewhere along the way we managed to damage the chuck to the point where the 3 jaws don't quite meet up anymore, which makes it pretty much impossible to center anything inside of the chuck. It's worth noting that the front bearing on the drill is also a bit loose, and that's not really helping anything, but it's good enough that I think the chuck is the major issue. I can't say for sure if the chuck was damaged by side loads, but I'm pretty sure that's the case for the bearing. So while it's not going to fix all of the problems on the drill, I'd like to at least replace the chuck on it, which should fix that main complaint, and hopefully get it to stop drilling triangular holes. Most drill chucks, and this one is no exception, are held on in 2 ways. The first way is a reverse thread bolt on the inside of the chuck. Luckily, this chuck isn't damaged to the point of not opening, and we're simply able to open the jaws all the way and install a socket and use another impact driver to loosen that bolt. This particular one is a T20, and the impact driver got it out no problem. Sometimes these bolts can be a real issue, but in our case, we didn't have to fight it. What we did have to fight, however, was the other thing holding the chuck in place. The chuck itself is also threaded and is tightened onto the output shaft of the drill. A common method for loosening these is using a large Allen wrench or hex key socket as shown here, tightened down into the drill chuck. Then you hold the drill flat against the table and hit your hex wrench or breaker bar with a hammer. Theoretically, this impact will break loose the chuck. But in our case, we had no such luck. Even using an impact gun to try to loosen it, everything was just spinning. At this point, I kinda gave up on it for a while and just left the center bolt out and used it normally. The hope was that maybe some of those normal drilling duties will help loosen the chuck. But unfortunately, it didn't seem like it helped at all. When we came back to it, we tried those impact techniques again and then ended up just clamping it down in the vise and giving it a lot of torque. Somewhere around this point, I realized it was likely that the drill would break in this process and accepted that fate. So this is about the part where we beat the hell out of it. In this particular shot, the drill is in high range, but rest assured, a lot of this was done with it in low range, as that little bit of extra gear reduction can help. Nothing else seems to be working, so let's try a little bit of heat. This is definitely asking for trouble, and we were trying not to cook the grease out of the bearings, although at this point it was a definite possibility. So we kept the application of heat fairly brief, and just went back to beating it up. If there was anything we left this video with, it's that these plastic drill housings are actually a lot more sturdy than they might seem. However, something I didn't realize was that the chuck of the drill wasn't entirely metal. And in the process of clamping it in the vise trying to hold it still, we managed to snap the jaws right out of the chuck. So now the chuck isn't just a little bit messed up, it's completely toast. So we have to get it off. For what it's worth, at this point the drill still seems to be working just fine. So we can get back to smashing it into oblivion. But after all of that, still nothing has moved. Although the drill's not sounding so good now because the chuck is so mangled it's rubbing against the housing of the drill. Okay, so where do we take it from here? Well... that took a big chunk off of the drill, although when it finally came off, some of that was just because the plastic melted away. We'll pick at it a bit and disassemble it a little bit farther, then try to beat it up again, and still no luck. So we took it back to the saw and cut it down even farther. Now it goes all the way down to where the threads on the shaft of the drill end. With the steel still pretty hot, we'll spray some oil on there and see if anything will get it loose. At this point, there's so little material left, really clamping it down in the vise might just make it tighter on the threads, so we have to be careful with where we're applying force. And if earlier we were resigned to breaking it, at this point all bets are off, and hell or high water, something is coming out of this drill. But hopefully it's not just that magical electrical smoke. This started off as an attempt to remove the chuck, but at this point it's more of just a torture test. And not only was the drill amazingly still working, but that last little piece of the chuck was amazingly still in place. The last resort would have been to take a Dremel and carefully cut that last piece of the chuck off of the threads. But before resorting to that, there was one final trick we could try. Does this seem like a trick we should have tried earlier? Maybe. We'll take our entire snub-nosed drill and toss it in the freezer. We left it there overnight and came back to get it around 15 hours later. And boy, was it cold. We took it straight out of the freezer and into the garage, and the humidity out there started frosting on the drill pretty quickly. But we knew we had to strike while the iron was cold, so we got right to hammering on it. And about 60 seconds later, we gave it one final Herculean pull, and every single part inside of the drill broke. Just kidding, although it's actually amazing that that wasn't the outcome. All the changes in temperature finally worked, and the parts were shocked loose. And there you have it. There is the drill with the chuck removed. There's still frost all over it, and the grease in the bearings is so thick that it will barely turn, so we'll leave it out in the sunlight for a while before getting back to it. And with that thawed out, we'll get to installing this new Dewalt chuck. This one is intended for a Dewalt hammer drill and is completely solid steel. This is a keyed chuck, which, while not quite as convenient, I actually prefer in some ways. It was also fairly inexpensive and should be harder to break than the original one. But before installing this one, we'll go ahead and put some anti-seize on the threads to hopefully prevent future headaches. We'll thread the chuck all the way down onto the shaft, then we'll tighten it down onto a hex socket and use a ratchet to get it nice and tight. And with that removed, all we have to do is put some Loctite on that left-hand bolt and tighten it down. And there we go, we finally have our stylish new chuck installed, and the drill somehow still works. But to confirm that, we should probably try to drill something with it. We'll tighten this 3/8" drill bit down into the chuck and go at a 2x4. Clearly, the drill still works. And despite that front bearing being loose, the drill bit being centered in the chuck means it drills fairly clean holes. So it's been an odyssey, but I think we have to call this a success. Although next time this problem arises, we'll probably try throwing it in the freezer first thing.